It was just after 10 on a Tuesday morning, and the snow outside my apartment in Minneapolis had been falling for hours, thick, relentless, the kind that makes the world look muted and still. I was at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee cooling beside my laptop, halfway through an email draft for a client, when my phone lit up. Unknown number. I let it ring. It stopped. Then it rang again. And again. By the fourth time, I answered, mostly to stop the vibration rattling across the table. "Corliss, this is Maggie Jensen, from Pine Hollow," the voice said. There was an edge to her tone, like she'd been running or had just come in from the cold. I hadn't heard from Maggie in years, but before I could even respond, she rushed on. "It's your mom. She's at Morven Cray's office. If you don't get here now, she might lose everything." My hand froze halfway to my coffee. "What do you mean? Is she hurt?" Maggie hesitated. I could hear the wind whipping through her end of the line. "No, not hurt, but it's bad. She asked for you." The answer didn't match the urgency in her voice. "What's going on?" I pressed. "Just get here, Corliss. Please. Before noon if you can." And then the line went dead. I sat there for a second, phone in my hand, staring at the snow swirling past the window. My mother hadn't asked for me in years, not on birthdays, not at Christmas, but now, apparently, she needed me. There's a saying I'd heard from an old neighbor: "You don't turn your back on family in a storm." I wasn't sure if that was wisdom or a curse, but I felt it settle on me like the snow outside, heavy and cold. I shut my laptop, grabbed my coat from the hook by the door, and started pulling together what I'd need for a drive like this. Thick gloves, scarf, a blanket for the passenger seat. I topped off my gas tank the week before, but I still stopped at the station down the block to fill it to the brim. And in this kind of weather, you didn't take chances. By the time I eased onto Highway 52, the radio was full of weather advisories: whiteout conditions near Cannon Falls, accidents slowing traffic north of Rochester. I turned the volume down, letting the wipers thud back and forth while the heater worked to keep the windshield clear. The first hour passed in that kind of hyper-focus only bad weather can force on you, hands tight on the wheel, eyes scanning for brake lights, every muscle alert for the twitch of a skid. Somewhere outside Zumbrota, the wind came harder, and the car shuddered as if a giant hand had shoved it from the side. I corrected the steering and kept going, my mind drifting in and out of the present. I remembered the last time I'd driven home in winter, years ago, for my father's funeral. My mother had stood stiff in the church, accepting condolences like she was cashing checks. We barely spoke that day, and when I left, she didn't ask me to visit again. So why now? "You think you're driving toward an answer," I murmured to myself, watching the snow blur the horizon. "You might just be driving toward another wound." The miles crawled by. Every so often, I passed a jackknifed truck or a sedan nose-deep in a drift, hazard lights blinking like distant beacons. My little sedan felt small out here, but I kept my pace steady. Somewhere around Pine Island, the knot in my stomach tightened. This wasn't just about an overdue bill or a leaky roof. Maggie had been vague on purpose, that much I was sure of, and my mother, if she'd truly asked for me, had broken a silence I thought would last the rest of our lives. My father's voice, remembered from long before his illness, came back to me. Family isn't always who shares your blood, it's who shows up when you need them. I didn't know if I was showing up out of love or obligation, but either way, I was on my way. By the time my GPS announced the turn for Pine Hollow Main Street, the snowfall had thickened again. I slowed, leaning forward over the wheel as the outline of the small town emerged through the haze. The same brick storefronts, the same narrow sidewalks. Everything looked frozen in time. Then I saw it. The rectangular shape of Morven Cray's real estate office at the end of the block, windows glowing against the white outside. My chest tightened. I turned into the lot, tires crunching over packed snow, and eased into a space facing the building. Through the frosted glass, I could make out a figure sitting across from the desk. I killed the engine, but kept my hands on the wheel, staring through the swirl of snow toward that shadowy outline. The engine ticked as it cooled, but I didn't move. Snowflakes stuck to the windshield, melting in slow trails that blurred my view. Through the frosted glass of Morven Cray's office, I could see her, my mother, sitting across from his desk. Her coat was dry, neatly buttoned, a scarf draped just so at her neck. She wasn't hunched or shivering. Her hands rested in her lap like she had all the time in the world. That's not a woman stranded in a storm. That's a woman in a meeting. I stepped out of the car, boots crunching in the packed snow, the wind pushing hard enough to make me lean into it. The bell above the door jingled faintly as I stepped inside, and the heat slapped my face so sharply it made my eyes sting. "Mom," I said, my voice tighter than I meant. "I came as fast as I could. Are you all right?" She looked up slowly, her expression flat, almost puzzled. "Why wouldn't I be?" That answer hit harder than the cold outside. I could still hear a mentor from my first job telling me, "Listen to what they're not saying." Before I could respond, Morven stood, smoothing a stack of papers. "Corliss, right? Roads must be awful." "They are," I said, taking in the room, the smell of old carpet and coffee, the whir of a small space heater. My mother's purse neatly closed beside her chair, like she planned to be here for a while. Morven gestured toward the chair next to her. "Please, sit." I stayed standing. "Maggie said this was urgent. What's going on?" My mother shifted in her seat, eyes flicking toward the desk. "It's nothing to panic over. We're just sorting some things out." Sorting some things out. Like she was talking about cleaning a closet, not whatever had dragged me 200 miles through a blizzard. As Morven shuffled papers, he said it without thinking. "Eudora said you'd be here by noon." I froze. "Eudora?" His head snapped up. "Oh, yes, well, she stopped in earlier just to check on your mother." I looked at Mom. No surprise in her face. If anything, she looked bored. A small, controlled smile touched her lips, then vanished. That told me more than anything else. My gaze moved to the desk. 3 clipboards stacked neatly, a yellow legal pad covered in notes I couldn't quite read, and there, half tucked under a folder, my street address in bold letters. Outside, the storm muffled the world, making the scratch of Morven's pen sound louder, more deliberate. You don't drive 200 miles for a coincidence. Something shifted in me. I wasn't here to rescue anyone. I was here to figure out what I'd walked into. Morven slid a document across the desk toward my mother. "Just here, Talia," he said, tapping the page. She reached for the pen without looking at me. I stepped closer, leaning forward to read the header before her pen touched the paper. The words were in bold, impossible to miss. "Notice to vacate." My voice came out colder than the snow outside. "Is that my name on that paper?" The words at the top of the page were impossible to miss. "Notice to vacate." My name was typed cleanly in the tenant line, and under it, in that unmistakable looping cursive, was my mother's signature. I felt my jaw tighten. "Why is my name on this?" She didn't even flinch. "It's just paperwork. Nothing to panic over. Paperwork is a receipt for intent. You don't file something like this unless you mean to see it through." I glanced at Morven. He kept his eyes on the desk, turning a page as if the conversation wasn't happening. The quiet hum of the space heater and the occasional scratch of his pen were the only sounds. "Nothing to panic over?" I said, keeping my voice low, measured. "You have my address on a legal notice that removes me from my home. What exactly is this? Some new definition of family business I missed?" Her hands folded in her lap. "Corliss, sometimes changes have to be made for the good of everyone." "Good of everyone?" I leaned back slightly, studying her face. "Or just good for the people sitting on this side of the desk?" She drew in a slow breath, avoiding my gaze. "You've been living alone in that place for years. It's too much for one person to keep up." Morven shifted uncomfortably, as though he wanted to melt into his chair. I remembered a friend once telling me, "When people dodge answers, they're protecting themselves, not you." I pressed again. "And Eudora's part in this? She just happens to be mentioned as soon as I walk in?" My mother tilted her head, the corners of her mouth tightening. "Your sister is concerned. She's looking out for me." While she spoke, her phone, sitting beside her purse, lit up. Out of habit, my eyes flicked to it. A message preview glowed against the dark screen. Eudora. Remember, act like you're unsure. We can't let her think we planned this. The air in the room seemed to shift. I didn't move, didn't let my expression change, but the line burned into my mind. This wasn't chaos. It was choreography. I stopped asking questions. Instead, I let my eyes wander the desk. Clipboard stacks with neatly labeled forms, a yellow legal pad filled with cramped handwriting, and coffee cup rings marking where long conversations had taken place. A manila folder lay partially open, my name written across the tab. I started counting details in my head. Document dates, how many forms had signature lines already filled, the faint creases in the corners from being handled more than once. These were breadcrumbs, and I intended to follow every one of them. My mother reached for the pen without glancing at me. Morven slid the page closer, murmuring something about finalizing the process. As her pen touched the paper, I leaned forward, my voice calm but edged with steel. You're signing something that changes everything for me without a single conversation. That's what you call looking out for family? She paused for the briefest moment, then finished her signature in one smooth motion. Morven slid the document into the folder with my address on it, pressing the metal clasp closed. I watched him tuck it away and thought, if they've been planning this, they've underestimated one thing. I don't walk away quietly. I stood, ready to leave, but not before letting my gaze pass over every paper on that desk, taking mental snapshots. This wasn't the end of the conversation. Not by a long shot. I didn't sit back down. The chair behind me might as well have been made of ice. My eyes stayed on my mother, who still wouldn't look at me directly. Is this how you say thank you for driving 200 miles in a blizzard? My voice was steady, clipped, the way you talk when you're holding something heavier than anger. Thalia's shoulders stiffened. She busied herself with adjusting the pen in her hand, then mumbled, I'm doing what's necessary. Necessary. I'd heard that word before, from people who wanted to sound pragmatic while they cut someone else out of the picture. An old attorney I once worked with used to say, the first time you let them cross the line without saying a word, you've just moved the line. I wasn't about to move mine. Before I could push further, the door swung open, letting in a blast of cold air and a flurry of snow. Eudora stepped inside without knocking, the storm still clinging to her boots, her hair perfect as if the weather had been staged. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on me with a smirk. I was wondering how long it would take you to catch up, she said, closing the door behind her. You've been busy behind my back, I replied, my tone even but unwelcoming. Correction, she said, stepping forward like she owned the space. I've been taking care of what you couldn't. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was the kind of line she'd rehearsed. Taking care? You mean orchestrating? Her lips curved, but her eyes stayed sharp. She leaned in slightly, her voice lowering so only I could hear. You've been living there on borrowed time. That time's up. I took a deliberate step toward her, erasing the space she thought she'd claimed. If you think I'm walking out quietly, you don't know me as well as you think. Morven's gaze darted between us, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of a document like it might combust if we stared at it long enough. This isn't just about a house, I said, my eyes never leaving Eudora's. It's about erasing me, and I'm not handing you the pen. Thalia shifted in her chair, her hand smoothing the front of her coat, as if she could press the tension flat. Eudora glanced at her, a silent exchange passing between them that made my stomach tighten. I decided not to tip my hand about the text I'd seen on Thalia's phone. That was leverage, and leverage was best saved for when someone thought they'd won. Every move you make from here on, I said, my voice low. I'll be watching. Eudora straightened, but there was a flicker, small, quick, in her expression, the kind that tells you someone has heard more than they wanted to. I let my eyes slide to the folder labeled with my address before turning toward the door. My hand was on the handle when her voice followed me. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I turned my head just enough to meet her stare. You haven't seen hard yet. The cold air outside bit into my face, but it was nothing compared to what was coming. By the time I got back to my house, the snow had thickened again, hissing against the windows like it was trying to get in. I didn't bother taking off my coat. I went straight to the hall closet where my file cabinet sat wedged between a stack of winter blankets and an old vacuum cleaner. The metal drawers stuck a little from the cold, but I yanked them open, flipping through folders that smelled faintly of dust and paper glue. My father's estate paperwork was in the second drawer, where I'd kept it since the day the lawyer handed it to me. Original deed, tax records, maintenance receipts. I knew these files like I knew the scar on my own hand. But now, tucked behind the thick manila envelope, was a smaller packet. Newer paper, smoother edges. I slid it out, my pulse picking up. County recorder's stamp, date from 2 months ago. Quitclaim deed, my name in the grantor's box. Eudora's name in the grantee's. And the signature line, my mother's, neat and certain, as if she'd been signing her own grocery list. A quitclaim doesn't make it legal, but it does mean they've already built the scaffold. I set the document flat on the dining table and took a slow breath. The storm rattled the windows in short, sharp bursts, like it wanted to punctuate every thought. Pulling my phone from my coat pocket, I scrolled to an old contact, Mark Anders, a former colleague from my finance days. He picked up on the third ring. Corliss? Wow, it's been a while. Mark, I need to check something. It's about a property loan, small town, family name on the title. If someone used a quitclaim deed to transfer ownership, could they leverage it for collateral? He didn't hesitate. Sure, as long as the bank's willing to take it at face value, they can tie the property into the loan. Why? I pinched the bridge of my nose. Hypothetically, what happens if that loan defaults? They'd seize the property. Sell it. Doesn't matter who lived there before. It's an asset now. Why? Did someone? Mark, just tell me. If she's approved, how fast does the lien hit? If the paperwork's already in, you could be looking at days. So if I don't act now, it's gone. Corliss, he started, but I was already thanking him and ending the call. I stared at the ceiling for a moment, feeling the shape of the trap around me. Eudora wasn't just trying to take the house, she was gambling with it. I went to the printer, pulled a fresh ream of paper, and started making copies of everything. Deed, tax receipts, the quitclaim. I dated each page, laid them in stacks, and started building a timeline. The only way to beat someone who bends the rules is to know them better than they do. My father's voice in my head reminded me, you can't win the game if you don't know the rules better than the person cheating. Once the copies were filed, I opened my laptop and began a list. Every contact, every document, every date that could matter. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was building a case. But paper wasn't going to be enough. I needed the kind of proof that came from history, from someone who knew what this property meant long before Eudora decided to cash it in. Fenella. She'd been my father's cousin, keeper of family stories, and more than a few hard truths. If anyone had letters, old wills, anything that tied my father's intent to me, it would be her. I sat at the table, the quitclaim deed on one side and the loan pre-approval letter, downloaded from the public county system, on the other. Together, they looked like the opening lines of a story someone else was trying to write for me. The wind outside roared, rattling the panes. I leaned back, letting the weight of it settle. They've signed the first page of this story, I whispered to the empty room. I'll sign the last. The next morning, I'd be at Fenella's, and I'd be ready. The next morning, the snow was crusted over in hard, glittering sheets, and the air had that brittle quiet you only get after a night of high wind. I drove out toward Fenella Markridge's farmhouse, the tires crunching over the gravel road in a steady rhythm. Her place sat at the far edge of Pine Hollow, where the town's grid gave way to rolling fields and half-buried fence lines. She must have been watching for me, because by the time I stepped onto her porch, the door swung open. Corliss, she said, her voice warm but lined with concern. Get in here before that wind takes your ears off. Inside, the smell of percolating coffee and wood smoke wrapped around me. She took my coat and gestured toward the worn kitchen table where 2 mugs already sat. You've got that look, she said, pouring coffee into mine. The same one your father wore when he decided he wasn't going to let the bank push him around. I need to see anything you have from him, I said. Papers, letters, anything about the house. She didn't ask why. She went straight to the sideboard in the dining room, pulled open the bottom drawer, and returned with an envelope yellowed at the edges. She slid it across the table. Inside was a photocopy of the original deed, my name printed cleanly as sole inheritor. Under it, a notarized letter from my father's lawyer, dated the month before he died. Fenella sat across from me, hands folded. Your father was clear. If this house leaves your name, it's as if he died twice. The words landed heavy but clean. An anchor, yes, but not the kind that drags you under. The kind that keeps you steady when the current's pulling hard. I slipped the copy back into the envelope and tucked it into my coat pocket. Thank you, I said. She reached over and gave my wrist a squeeze. Corliss, they'll test you. Make sure you're ready to push back harder. By the time I left Fenella's, the sun was breaking through the clouds in sharp silver slices. I headed straight toward my mother's place. Her car was gone. Good. That gave me time. The old key was still on my ring. The lock turned with a quiet click, and I stepped inside. The air was cold, like no one had been in the house for days. I moved quickly to the home office, the carpet muffling my steps. The desk drawers yielded neatly organized files. I pulled out anything that looked tied to the house: draft versions of the quitclaim deed, printouts of the loan pre-approval, email exchanges between Thalia, Eudora, and Morven. I laid each one flat on the desk, taking photos with my phone, making sure every header, every signature was clear. The ticking of the wall clock seemed louder in the stillness, measuring out my intrusion in seconds. My breath fogged in the cold room, and the smell of old paper and ink filled the air. I had just slipped the last file back into its folder when I heard it, the slow crunch of tires on the driveway. My stomach tightened. I pocketed my phone, eased the office door shut, and moved through the kitchen to the back door. The snow squeaked under my boots as I crossed the yard, ducking behind the shed until I heard the front door open and close. Back in my truck, I pulled off my gloves and scrolled through the photos. Each image was a piece of a larger picture, but one subject line stopped me cold. Final transfer, no going back. I stared at it for a long moment, the wind pressing against the truck's frame. We'll see about that, I said out loud. By the time I reached town, the whispers had already started. By late morning, Pine Hollow had that uneasy calm that comes after a storm. Streets plowed, sidewalks shoveled, but the air still sharp enough to sting your face. I pushed open the door to the only coffee shop in town, shaking off the cold. The smell of dark roast and cinnamon rolls drifted over me, but it didn't feel welcoming. I ordered a black coffee, wrapped my hands around the cup for warmth, and scanned for a seat. That's when I caught it. Two older women at a corner table, voices pitched low, but not low enough. Heard Eudora's closing on that place soon, one said, stirring her drink slowly. Shame about her sister. Guess she wasn't meant to keep it, the other replied, her tone final, like she was talking about a foreclosure notice in the classifieds. I turned my chair slightly, pretending to watch the snow outside. They'd already written my ending, and I hadn't even had the chance to speak my part. Small towns are efficient that way. They'll draft your obituary before you've stopped breathing. I sipped the coffee, letting the bitterness settle on my tongue. People glanced my way and quickly looked back down, eyes sliding off like oil on water. Isolation has a sound, a low hum you hear when a room decides you don't belong. I left the shop and walked toward Main Street, the crunch of my boots on the salted sidewalk, the only steady thing. Morven Cray's office sat halfway down the block, its window blinds tilted just enough to keep out curiosity. I pushed the door open without knocking. He was on the phone, pacing behind his desk, voice light with confidence. Once Eudora finalizes, we can flip it before winter's over. Yes, the resale potential is strong. I stepped inside far enough for the bell to jingle. Planning ahead, are we? His head snapped up. For a moment, something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe irritation, but it vanished behind an awkward smile. Corliss, I was just discussing possibilities. Nothing set in stone. When a man smiles while being cornered, I said, letting my gaze rest on the stack of folders by his elbow, he's either lying or selling. Which is it today? He chuckled weakly. Let's not make this personal. We're all just trying to move forward. Forward for who? I asked, but I didn't wait for him to answer. Outside, the wind had picked up again. pushing stray snow into little drifts along the curb. I walked the length of Main Street, noting how familiar faces angled away, how doors seemed to close just a fraction faster when I passed. This was the part no legal document prepared you for, the court of public opinion, where verdicts were handed down over pie and coffee. I pulled out my phone and texted Fenella. They've turned this into a done deal in everyone's minds. I need to make them doubt. The truth in this town was a fragile thing, easily replaced by repetition. If enough people believed Eudora was the rightful owner, the fight in the courthouse would already be uphill. I was a few steps from my truck when my phone buzzed again. No name, just a number I didn't recognize. The message was short. Stop digging, or you'll regret it. I stood still, the cold seeping into my gloves, and lifted my eyes to the coffee shop window across the street. The reflection caught the row of parked cars, a few figures moving inside, the faint outline of faces watching from behind glass. The threat didn't scare me. It told me I was getting close. The Pine Hollow Town Hall conference room was already warm from the bodies gathering inside when I stepped through the door. Midday light spilled in through the tall windows, catching on the polished wood of the long table in the center. I'd come early, enough to take the seat at the head and set my phone against a water glass, camera angled just right. The live stream was already running, private link, only to people I trusted, and a few legal contacts who needed to see this in real time. I kept my breathing even as the door opened again. Eudora walked in first, her heels clicking like punctuation on the wood floor. Talia followed close, carrying a leather-bound folder as if it were something precious. Morven trailed behind, all smiles, clutching a manila envelope too tightly for a man at ease. I thought we should settle this in the light, not in back offices, I said, before they even sat down. Eudora's smile didn't reach her eyes. Light only hurts those with something to hide. Perfect, I thought. Let's blind them. I slid a stack of papers across the table. Here's the timeline. Property transfers, loan applications, email communications, all tied together in a neat little package. She glanced down, but didn't touch them. Anyone can print papers. True, I said, reaching into my bag again, but not everyone has the original deed. I laid Fenella's copy next to the quitclaim deed they'd been pushing. The room went quieter, the murmur of townspeople outside the door fading into stillness. Word had gotten out that the meeting was open. A few had slipped in, leaning against the walls, curious. This, I tapped the original deed, names me as sole inheritor. This, I touched the quitclaim, is the one you filed, signed by my mother, transferring it to you. And we're going to have a little check on that. I looked at the clerk, who had been sitting at the far end with her notary stamp ready. Would you compare the signature on this deed to my verified bank signature card? The clerk adjusted her glasses, studying both documents. After a long pause, she looked up. It doesn't match. Eudora's composure cracked, just slightly, a blink too long, the faintest tightening of her jaw. Talia's fingers gripped the strap of her purse so tightly her knuckles whitened. If you're going to steal from me, I said, letting my voice carry to the corners of the room, at least forge it well. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. My phone screen lit up, viewers climbing, comments scrolling too fast to read. Morven cleared his throat. Let's not get carried away. But a local reporter cut in, notebook in hand. Are you saying the signature on this legal deed is fraudulent? I'm saying, I replied, keeping my eyes on Eudora, that the truth has a way of surviving bad handwriting. She leaned forward, voice sharp. This is a stunt. You've been dragging the family name through the mud. I haven't touched the family name, I interrupted. You did that the moment you decided the house was worth more than the person living in it. The reporter's pen scratched across the page. Murmurs swelled again. Morven tried to redirect, talking about possible misunderstandings and amicable resolutions, but the weight in the room had shifted. Small-town politics worked both ways. When you had the truth and the nerve to stand behind it, the crowd could be a shield instead of a wall. I kept my answers calm, deliberate, each fact laid out without raising my voice. The contrast made Eudora's defensiveness sharper, more brittle. She was unraveling, and the people in the room could see it. Then my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced down. Unknown number. You just made your last move. I let my eyes sweep the room. Neighbors, reporters, a few council members. Any of them could have sent it. My stomach tightened, but not with fear. The game had shifted again, and I wasn't the one scrambling. I slid my papers back into my bag, stood, and met Eudora's glare head-on. I walked out into the cold, my breath fogging the air, carrying proof, and a new set of enemies. The air outside town hall was brittle with cold, sharp enough to sting the inside of my nose. Eudora came down the stone steps like she was trying to outrun the whispers following her, her phone pressed to her ear. It buzzed again before she could finish the call, and she barked something short before hanging up. The look on her face told me it wasn't a friend, likely the bank. Thalia lingered at the top of the steps, clutching her bag, her mouth opening as if to speak. I didn't give her the chance. I walked past without slowing, the weight of the folder in my hand far more important than anything she could say now. Sometimes silence is the sharpest blade. At the edge of the crowd, Morven tried to slide away from a knot of reporters. The confident grin he'd worn inside had vanished, replaced with a tightness around his eyes. He ducked his head when one of them called his name, pretending he hadn't heard. By the time I reached my truck, the parking lot was buzzing with conversations, half speculation, half satisfaction. In Pine Hollow, news moved faster than weather fronts. I could already feel the shift. Eudora's carefully built image was cracking. In this town, reputation is currency. Lose it, and people stop taking your checks. That evening, the wind had picked up again, rattling the shutters as I sat at my kitchen table, the day's documents spread in neat lines. A knock at the door broke my focus. When I opened it, Fenella stood there, her scarf pulled tight and cheeks pink from the cold. "I couldn't wait until morning," she said, stepping inside. "You need to hear this." We sat, and she leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I was at the feed store this afternoon. Silas Brannock was there, running his mouth. Said he gave Eudora access to some of the old family documents we had stored. For cash." My stomach tightened. "How much?" "Less than what you spend on winter tires," she said flatly. I shook my head, a bitter smile tugging at my mouth. "Then he's cheaper than I thought." It wasn't the money that burned. It was the ease. The casual way someone in the bloodline could sell me out and then joke about it in public. "Do you want me to write it down?" Fenella asked. "Yes. And sign it." I slid a notepad across the table. "This goes in the file." She wrote, her pen moving steadily, then handed it back. Her eyes caught mine. "Corliss, they're not stopping. You know that." "I do," I said, slipping the page into a plastic sleeve. "And neither am I." When she left, the house felt colder. I sat there, looking at the growing stack of evidence, paper-clipped, labeled, dated, months of planning on their part, dismantled one piece at a time. They'd been building this for months. I was building something they couldn't tear down in a day. It was close to midnight when I heard it, a faint rustle near the door, then the sound of something sliding against the floor. I walked over and found an envelope, plain white, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the words printed in bold black letters. "You can't protect everyone." I turned it over. Blank. I stood there a moment, the quiet of the house pressing in, the weight of the message heavier than the paper in my hand. The warning didn't make me hesitate. It made me decide who needed protecting first. The snow on Thalia's front walk crunched under my boots, the sound too loud in the stillness of the late morning. The sky was a washed-out blue, the kind that looks harmless but hides air sharp enough to bite. I didn't bother calling ahead. This conversation wasn't something to schedule like a dentist appointment. When she opened the door, I didn't wait for an invitation. The heat inside was faint, just enough to keep the pipes from freezing. Thalia was at the kitchen table, bills spread out in messy layers, envelopes still sealed. She looked up, eyes guarded. "You forced me into this corner," she said, her voice tight. "I wouldn't have done it if you'd just been more cooperative." I took the chair across from her, setting my gloves on the table. "You signed away my house before I even knew I was on trial." Her chin lifted. "I had to make a choice. Eudora wasn't the one who lived there, maintained it, paid for it. I was." She pressed her lips together. "You've been stubborn since you were a child, Corliss. This is what happens when you refuse to be reasonable." Blame is the currency of the guilty. They spend it freely when they think it can buy them out of consequence. I didn't bite. Instead, I leaned back, letting her fill the silence. And she did. Thalia's voice took on a wistful lilt, the tone she used when spinning a story for company. You know, Eudora stepped in when the place was falling apart. She poured her own money into repairs, into making it livable again. You never really cared for it. You kept it closed off, as if it were just a storage space for old memories. I watched her closely. Is that how you're telling it now? It's the truth as I see it, she said, stacking the unpaid bills like they'd been the point of our meeting. Years of quiet work, fixing the roof, repainting the siding, replacing the furnace, vanished in her revision like they'd never happened. The sting wasn't just in the lie, it was in how easily she wore it. Family narratives are weapons when they need to be. I reached into my bag and laid a stack of papers between us. Maintenance receipts, dated photos of renovations, bank statements showing each payment I'd made for taxes and repairs. Her eyes skimmed them, the faintest flicker crossing her face. History isn't written by the victors, I said. It's written by the ones who keep the records. The edge of her composure wavered. You've kept all this? Of course I have. And my attorney has copies. Every word you've said today, every falsehood, it's not going to stick. The facts are already in the right hands. Her shoulders slumped, just slightly. I could almost hear the sound of the ground shifting under her. I stood, tucking the evidence back into my bag. I didn't come here for your permission. I came to make sure you understood the chapter you've been writing is your last. I was halfway to the door when her voice rose behind me. You'll regret making enemies of your own blood. I turned just enough to meet her eyes. Only if I forget what they've done. When I stepped outside, the sun had climbed higher, casting long, pale shadows across the snow. The courthouse steps felt colder than the wind, and far more honest. The county courthouse always smelled faintly of paper and floor polish, like time had been filed away in manila folders and locked behind oak doors. I was halfway down the quiet side hallway when Zarina appeared, her coat still dusted with snow. She carried a thick, sealed envelope in both hands as if it were a newborn. This is it, she said, passing it to me without ceremony. Original, court-certified record. Whatever they've filed after this doesn't stand. I broke the seal with my thumb, the crisp edges catching on my glove. My name was there, printed in bold on the deed, backed by the seal of the court and the signature of the judge who had signed off on my father's will. You just gave me the last piece I needed, I told her. Her eyes softened. Use it wisely, Corliss. Paper like that can burn people down, but it can burn you too if you're standing too close. There's power in proof, but there's peace in knowing when to use it. I carried the envelope back to my truck and sat there for a long moment with the engine off, breath misting the inside of the windshield. On the passenger seat lay the thick folder I'd built over the last weeks. Emails, forged documents, Fenella's sworn statement, receipts, photos. I could march into a courtroom tomorrow and grind this into dust. But justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about making harm impossible to repeat. That night, I cleared the kitchen table, set down a fresh legal pad, and began writing. The letter was addressed to both Thalia and Eudora. My terms were plain. I retain full ownership of the property. They will have no legal or financial claims to it, now or in the future. I paused, pen hovering, then wrote the last line. This isn't reconciliation. This is prevention. When I folded it into an envelope, I felt lighter, not from forgiveness, but from finally drawing a line that wouldn't be moved. The next day, I drove to Fenella's. She answered the door with her sleeves rolled up, the kitchen smelling of lemon polish and bread dough. I handed her 2 duplicate sets of the certified record and my compiled evidence. Put these somewhere safe, I told her. If anything happens to me, you know where they go. She studied me for a moment, then tucked the packets into her lockbox without a word. Driving back, the late afternoon sun cast the snow in a hard, white glare. I realized I wasn't thinking about whether they'd try again. I was thinking about how I'd made it so their next attempt wouldn't matter. I don't trust them to keep their word. I trust myself to keep my distance. That night, I placed the certified documents in my safe, turned the key, and spun the lock with deliberate calm. As I was setting the safe back against the wall, my phone buzzed. A new message. No greeting. No pretense. From Eudora. You think this is over? I locked the screen without replying. I woke up the next morning knowing exactly how I wanted this to end. The afternoon light slanted across my living room, catching on the polished edge of the coffee table where the folders lay neatly stacked. A week had passed since Zarina handed me the certified records, and every day since, I'd felt the weight of them less like a burden and more like a weapon. At 4 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. Thalia and Eudora stood together on the porch, the kind of pairing that would have been comical if it hadn't been so poisoned. Eudora's chin was high, her lipstick a precise, practiced shade. Thalia's eyes flickered everywhere but mine. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. They followed me to the dining table where my laptop sat open, a video call already in progress. My attorney's face appeared in the window, framed by shelves of leather-bound law books. "This won't take long," I told them. "I wanted you both here in daylight to make sure nothing gets lost in the shadows." Eudora gave a tight smile. "We're here to talk, not to be lectured." "Good," I said, "because I'm not here to argue. I'm here to end it." I slid 2 sets of papers across the table. These are signed legal agreements. They state that I retain full ownership of the property. You forfeit any claim, legal, financial, or otherwise. Violate these terms, and I'll trigger immediate legal action. Talia's voice wavered. "You can't just—" "I can," I said, "and I have. My attorney has copies. The county has copies. This is the last time this house will be a bargaining chip." Eudora's nails tapped the table. "You can't cut family out like this." "I'm cutting out rot before it spreads," I replied, my voice calm enough to make her blink. Their eyes darted to each other, a silent exchange of calculation. I waited until I had their attention again before sliding one last page forward. "There's a clause at the end," I said. "One bedroom will remain untouched. It's reserved for Thalia, only if she ever needs genuine help. No conditions, no strings, but the door stays shut to lies." The room held its breath. Even Eudora's smirk faltered. "This is your choice," I continued. "Sign, and we end it here. Refuse, and we keep going until a judge tells you the same thing I'm telling you now." Talia's hand trembled slightly as she picked up the pen. Eudora hesitated longer, but finally signed, the motion sharp, angry. When it was done, I gathered the agreements, sliding them into my folder. The storm I'd been carrying for months broke in silence. Eudora stood so quickly, her chair tipped back and clattered against the floor. She caught it with one hand, shoved it in place, and walked out without looking at me. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the glass. Thalia lingered, her eyes on the carpet. She didn't speak. When she finally turned toward the door, her shoulders were hunched, as if the air in the room had been too heavy to breathe. The lock clicked behind them, and for the first time in a long time, the quiet in my house wasn't a threat. I sat at the table alone for a moment, the signed papers under my hand, feeling the sharp edge of relief. Some people spend years chasing reconciliation. I'd learned there was more strength in choosing what you carry and what you leave behind. I stepped outside, the cold biting clean against my face. Down the driveway, red taillights glowed briefly before disappearing into the trees. I turned the key in the lock, shutting the door with deliberate calm. "It's my house," I whispered into the stillness. It always was. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of who might come knocking.